So, Paul, there are various opinions and definitions of what critical thinking is. So, what's your definition of it?
You're right, there are a lot of definitions of it, and it's perhaps a rather nebulous area for many people. What I think critical thinking should be is about approaching information in a way that's curious and inquiring, and that's something we can apply in all aspects of learning in all our lives.
And I suppose for lots of language teachers, they would like to know how critical thinking can be integrated into their lessons. And certainly when we were developing the syllabus for the Life series, we wanted to make critical thinking a key component of the units of the book. Perhaps you can say a little more about why that was and how teachers could actually integrate it into the classroom.
Sure, well, it was actually very natural to apply critical thinking activities or a critical thinking approach to this course because it's a very information-rich course. There are stories, for example, about scientific discoveries, about human achievement, about tensions within the environment. And in each of these cases, we're asking the learner to approach the information they see with an inquiring and questioning mind. There's a unit in, or a spread I should say, in the upper intermediate about Madagascar and about the harvesting of timber. I don't know if you know, Madagascar is a kind of unique environment and one that conservationists are desperate to preserve and protect. And yet a lot of its ancient forests, hardwood timber, is being harvested for furniture, for teak furniture and so on, in developing countries all over the world and developed countries all over the world. The text is written in rather emotive terms, and this fact is presented as a kind of environmental crime. So we've developed a critical thinking exercise where the student actually is asked to pick out the emotive language, to focus on the emotive language, and then question perhaps the writer's agenda, the author's agenda. So it's not just a question of looking at the information and taking it as seen, as read, but actually looking behind that at what a particular author's or writer's agenda or viewpoint might be.
But also presumably by pulling out that language, it's also giving them language which they can use in their own writing as well.
Of course, that's part of the idea. I mean, critical thinking, often people think about it as a way of analysing others' discourse, but in fact, of course, it's something you should apply to your own discourse, whether that be spoken or written. Yeah.
In that previous example you gave, that was from upper intermediate level life. But one of the comments that teachers often have with reference to critical thinking is that it's perhaps inappropriate for lower level language learners. Now, we've actually introduced basic critical thinking tasks even at elementary level life. Perhaps you could say a little bit more about how you deal with critical thinking at the lower levels.
Yeah, well, I think that does go back to what I was saying earlier, which is that it's about developing a critical mindset or a critical disposition. And I don't see any reason why that process shouldn't begin early on. Of course, to ask a student to do the activity that we just looked at about picking out emotive adjectives would be a nonsense at an elementary level. But there are exercises you can do that encourage this. If we just have a look at one from the pre-intermediate version. It's this wonderful article about women wrestlers in Bolivia. And the critical thinking exercise is inference. And at a higher level, you might simply ask a straightforward question and ask the students, what do you think the writer is implying by this? At this level, of course, you have to give more support. And the exercise here that you can see is actually called Reading Between the Lines, gives three statements as if they were spoken by characters in the story, and asks the students to identify which of the characters might have expressed this view. So the exercise is one that you would apply at a higher level, inference, but in fact, you've called it something slightly different, and you've given them far more support in doing that. So all that is encouraging and sort of inculcating a critical mindset. And I think that's something you can do easily from a lower level.
So in fact, the question is not really can you use critical thinking at different levels. It's more about you can do critical thinking if you have the right kind of texts, basically.
I think there's something in that, yes. I think there's absolutely something in that. But I think also it's about developing a certain approach. And as I said right at the beginning, that's an approach that you can apply not only to text, it's an approach you could apply actually to explanations of language or to any other aspect of learning in your life. And that's why I think it's such a sort of key and fundamental thing.